Thursday, September 10th. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, so please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we have Spanish translation available.
Sandra Trujillo.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Sandra Trujillo y estoy aquí para interpretar esta noche. Si alguien necesita de mis servicios, por favor ven a hablar conmigo. Voy a estar localizada a la parte de atrás del salón. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have headsets available for the hearing impaired. Public comment. A2.
Kate Smith.
It seems to me that the approval of the 2008-2009 fiscal year unaudited actuals, it's about 100 pages, is something that should be done at a regular meeting when the public attends. I am the only person in the audience. Also, the famous Peyton Wolcott wrote to the district and to the Santa Barbara mayor to introduce her website and work, which is throughout the country. She has managed to arrange 26 states' school districts placing their check registry online. This district is so corrupt, and the cover-up of wrongdoing is so long-term, that it isn't worth our time to pursue this. But I do ask that the incredible black hole of communication be acknowledged, and I ask that somebody pass on that letter from the very famous Peyton Wolcott to Eric Smith, because he said he never received it. At last school board meeting, Carolyn Renard, Esquire, stated it well. There is no complaint procedure. There is no accountability in this school district. There is severe retaliation and embezzlement. I'd like to note that the minutes reflected that 10 parents spoke on a topic about special education. Every parent's name was listed, and the exact same thing was said. So-and-so spoke about special education. This is false. Everyone spoke about a different aspect, and specifically, in terms of retaliation, David Gilbertson spoke about the fact that he had been retaliated against for his activism and advocacy for the students, and that he was demoted, and that he wanted his job back. I'm submitting a letter of inquiry, first sent February 19th. It took until today to get a response, and the response was from Craig Price's secretary. So publicly, I am submitting the response from Griffith and Thornburg to my questions. It took me 9 months to get a response, and I'll read to you what 5 of the responses say. Your question is derisive, false, and argumentative.
15 seconds.
And it does not constitute a proper Public Records Act request. I would like to spend 20 minutes talking about a complaint about Brian Sarvis and about the lawyer Craig Price. There is
Thank you, Mrs.
misappropriation of money.
Time is up.
Yes, time is up.
And with that, we will move on to item B1 on the action agenda. This is the approval of end-of-year financial statement, unaudited actuals for fiscal year 2008-2009.
Well, let me first of all talk about why we're having this meeting tonight. When the electronic file came through, only 2/3 of this material was included. We print right off of the electronic file, and we post to the web based on the electronic file. So we have remedied that, and thank you, board, for coming in tonight. I know we've already gone over much of the material, but we do need a full copy of the material before we actually have our approval. So, Eric Smith, our Deputy Superintendent for Business Services, will make the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. The unaudited actuals represent our year-end closing statement relative to the revenues we've received and the expenses that we've incurred. It's interesting that we talked about the unaudited actuals earlier today among my staff, and it's not a policy discussion because it is what it is. This is the way we ended. This is the way year ended. And actually year ended a little bit better than we anticipated. As you saw from my narrative, our ending balance ended up being 8.29% as opposed to 6.21%. And that variance was largely attributed to two factors. The first is that when we adopted the budget, we used the revenue limit deficit factor that was published and used as industry standard at the May revise. When the budget was actually adopted by the state, a lower revenue limit deficit was used, and that was on July 28th. So obviously we couldn't contemplate that. The second issue is that we basically ended up projecting or showing in our multi-year projections the restricted ending balance sweep in fiscal year 8-9. We actually executed that sweep, or I'm sorry, 9-10 rather. We actually executed that sweep in 8-9, which also bolstered our ending balance. So those were the two main variables that accounted for the variance between what we projected at estimated actuals at budget adoption and the unaudited actuals, which you have before you today. Relative to timing, we have a statutory deadline to meet. We have to submit these documents to the County Office of Education by September 15th. That's prescribed in Ed Code. So that was really the necessity of meeting again, given that we didn't have all the documents in the last regular agenda. So what I'd like to do is walk you through the unaudited actuals document, which is in the SACS, the Standardized Account Code Structure format. If you can turn to page 9 of 190. And I don't know if everybody can see that or if we need to dim the lights here or not.
Can we focus it a little more?
Yeah, we've been trying to play with that.
It says there's an autofocus. Want to go to 9 or 4, Eric?
Hey,
How
I don't
about
know,
just enlarging
can
of
we
the
make it
columns?
larger?
Yes.
And then maybe autofocus. Well, maybe not that large.
That's better.
Yeah, that's better. So what, yeah, and if we can see the header up here, so I can see what year I'm in.
Do you want 9 or do you want to, you started on, you told me 4.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4.
Oh, okay.
4 of 190?
4 of 190. So obviously, we're looking at the 8-9 columns here, A plus B plus C, which is unrestricted plus restricted equals total. Over here in 9-10, the way the software loads it automatically rolls in our budget. But our focus is here in terms of what happened. And the first few pages are really a super summary of revenue and expense. As you can see here on the unrestricted column in the major object groupings, this is the amount of revenue we received. You can see, $81 million or almost $82 million in revenue limit sources on the unrestricted side, another 3.7 on the restricted side, so roughly 85 million here. Federal revenue, 397 on the unrestricted. The restricted is really swelled because what you're seeing is we actually receipted the ARA funds here, but we could not actually expense them until 9/10. So that's
He's on page 3.
page 3. I'm sorry. Page 3 rather than 4. So what you're seeing here is the distortion of the federal revenue due to that large influx of ARA, the Budget Stabilization Funds, as well as the Title I. Other state, it's pretty similar distribution to what we've seen in years past. And then other local, you can see the roughly 3 million unrestricted, 3 million two restricted for a total of roughly 6 million. I'm not going to get into this in a lot of detail, but you can see combined certificated salaries, roughly 63 million, it's close to 64. Classified salaries, 19 million. Employee benefits, which was both health and welfare and all the statutory benefits associated with salaries, 19,500,000. Books and supplies, 5,362,000. services and other operating expenses, which includes not only all the professional services, but also includes all of our utility cost, electricity, water, garbage, waste, things of that nature in there. Capital outlay, you can see a very small amount, and then other outgo, not very much as well. Here you can see our transfers of indirect cost, and in most cases what you're going to see is that we're charging the indirect against restricted programs, and it has the net effect of reducing unrestricted expense, which if you think about that logically, it's the same as income on the unrestricted side. So here what you can see is our excess of revenues over expenditures before transfers and uses. And you can see that on the unrestricted side, you know, it's significant, but then we have our contributions that we have to make. No? Oh, contributions are down here. This is our restricted, is actually planned deficit spending. We're burning down a restricted balance, and then you can see the net between the difference. So down here, you're seeing our transfers out to other funds, which in most cases would probably be deferred maintenance. And then we have our other sources and uses, which is our unused site fees. And then you can see the effect of the contributions, basically the amount of money we have to transfer from the unrestricted side to the restricted side to make it balance to zero. So can we go to the next page? Is there any questions on that page? Pretty straightforward. So here we can see our beginning balance as of July 1 on the unrestricted side of the budget, $10,695,000. We had about $4.5 million on the restricted side for a total beginning balance of $15,000,002. We had no audit adjustments there, so that moved forward. And what you can see is that overall, on the unrestricted side, we actually spent more than we took in by $602. Restricted, we actually brought in more than we spent, largely because of ARA, which we have not spent all those dollars, and they've moved over until the next year, and we'll talk about that. And then you can see the net between the difference. But as you pull this through, and I'm trying to remember about, since we executed the sweep, where would that show, Meg? The ending balance sweep, would that be in the contributions?
No, the sweep is in the,
Meg, could you grab that microphone?
Yeah.
Right there, please?
Okay, the sweep that we did was moving from unrestricted to restricted. So I believe we did that by decreasing revenue and increasing revenue in the unrestricted side. Or,
I mean, from restricted to unrestricted.
restricted to unrestricted, sorry.
Okay, so decrease, and just increasing the unrestricted revenue.
Which fell then to the fund balance.
Okay,
And where does that show on this spreadsheet?
It's on the previous page in revenues.
Good.
okay. And so as that flows through, you can see this is the 3% for economic uncertainties. And what we're looking at is our ending balance ended up pretty similar to what we had as a beginning balance. As you know, we were greater than 8%. I think we were like 8.10 or something last year. This year we're 8.29. Here's the 3%. Here is basically the undesignated amount, or the difference that's liquid and unrestricted, which, as I mentioned earlier this week, a portion of that, primarily the amount of the sweep, which is about $2 million, we think will be incorporated in our plan to pay the $252 per ADA back to the state. So if we go to the next page, one of the things we always want to look at is how we ended up in cash in Object 9110. As you can see, on 6/30, we had a little over $4 million in unrestricted dollars and a little bit more than $2.4 million in restricted, so a little bit more than 6.5. Obviously, our cash position was pretty good at year end. These are the other components of the ending balance. You know, we have both assets and liabilities, but unless anybody has any questions relative to that, we'll keep moving on. In your agenda, or in your packet, the rest of it is just revenue and expenditure detail by the major object groupings, and there's a lot of it. But what we'd like to do now is probably fast forward a little bit and go, the charters had nothing really newsworthy in there. I think we'd like to go to the Child Development Fund, which is 28 of 190. Can we move that over a little bit, Meg?
Want to go this way?
Over and down a little, or up, I'm sorry. I can't seem to see line C on that.
2 more lines
It
up.
needs to go up some more.
Go up 2 more lines. 1 more. There it is.
Okay. As I mentioned on Tuesday, the Child Development Fund is having problems. You know, unlike the general fund, which has basically made the adjustments due to declining revenue from the state, I think that the Child Development Fund kind of got lulled to sleep a little bit, and as their revenue was decreasing, they haven't made those type of reductions. You can see here their deficit spending. I think this is something that probably occurred to some extent last year, but really crept up on them this year. As you saw the data, it's just, you know, decrease in state revenue just continues to get worse. We've been working with them relative to putting together their own fiscal recovery plan. They've made a significant amount of adjustments already. They're going to make more. So basically, we're having to contribute, and you can see here, one of the transfers out of the general fund, at least a portion of it, $263,000 out of the general fund, was into the Child Development Fund to support them. Now, you're probably used to seeing that in the Cafeteria Fund, but not in the Child Development Fund. This year's kind of an anomaly. We have no interfund transfer into the Cafeteria Fund, but we have one in the Child Development Fund. So what we've done is structure a plan with the child development folks to basically get them where they're self-contained in 2 years, and also have them pay us back the amount that we're contributing this year. Okay, so if we can move on to the Cafeteria Fund, which would be 38 of 190. Probably want to look at 38 and then 39. So once again, we'll have to move that down to line C. So in this year, this is the 8-9 year, you can see that in line C, in the excess of revenue or expense, you can see that they're actually had a increased fund balance of about 129, almost 130,000. Which is a little bit misleading, because if you move to the next page and you look at the components of the ending balance, you can see that they had about 64,000 move forward, which was basically mostly stores. It wasn't liquid, it was their inventory. But basically they did have an increase of revenue over expense, which basically, when you netted those two, it was about 194,000. But about 75,000 of that is the Harding Cafeteria fund balance. But even if you subtract out their stores and you subtract out the Harding fund balance, they're still positive, which I think is a real success story, given that, you know, we've seen some years where we've had to transfer $500,000 over there. Well, not in my tenure, but I hear horror stories. So I think, you know, that's a really positive sign.
Mr. Herron?
Recently, we made some type of an adjustment to the cafeteria fund. Where does that show up in here?
Well, what we did is Meals for Needy would come in the 8,000s. So what we decided to do is basically, rather than give them an interfund transfer, now they're getting money in the revenue limit sources, and they should be getting it from the secondary and elementary district for the Meals for Needy add-on, although I'm not sure they received it from the secondary district in 8-9, did they?
In 8-9, they did not receive a contribution or an interdistrict transfer, nor did they get Meals for Needy in the 80-91. That comes in 9-10. However, we did move some Meals for Needy from the high school into the cafeteria fund, and that is in other local.
Yeah, I think your point is, you know, the accounting treatment does make them look better. There's no doubt about it. But, you know, that was a whole philosophical discussion we had. Now, one of the things I'm not sure the board's aware of, and I know Nancy was not happy about, revenue limit add-ons go away when you become basic aid, and Meals for Needy is a revenue limit add-on. So one of the things we've talked about was when you get deep enough in basic aid, should we identify a percentage that, you know, we've always allocated based on Meals for Needy and give them that percentage over time? And that's obviously something the board might have to consider, but, you know, the thing that's great about Meals for Needy is that, you know, when you get participation up, they get more money, you know, and then that's adjusted by COLA because it's, you know, it's a revenue limit add-on. However, there is a piece of legislation on the governor's desk that would do away with all those add-ons and put them on the revenue limit on a per ADA basis, and we're watching that right now. So, you know, this whole argument might be academic anyways.
So you're saying, though, that for 0809, the cafeteria fund did not get the full amount of Meals for Needy that comes into the district anyway, because we didn't do that before the year started.
That's correct. It only got a portion of what the high school, the high school, I'm going to guesstimate, is about 139,000, maybe almost 400,000 that they generate in the high school.
139, almost 140,000, is that what you mean?
No, about three, it's in the high threes to low fours, thousands. And we only moved over, I think came out to be just a little over 2.
And I don't think we did it at all at 07, 08. And so one of the things that we've been playing with among, you know, when we're doing our research and putting together the plan is that since the cafeteria fund operates in the elementary district, the Meals for Needy dollars, and depending on what the board wants to do, you can make an argument that the elementaries do those. And so we're looking at, you know, in constructing our plan for the repayment, obviously it's easier to get there in the secondary district than it is in the elementary district. So we might have a proposal that looks at some kind of sharing there, you know, to make the elementary district whole, which would ultimately only make the state whole, but it's our whole and we're in it, so.
The elementary gets very little reimbursement for Meals and Needy on the revenue limit side because they're only reimbursed like pennies, whereas the high school it's like $1.23. So their money, they generate a lot more money just by cents.
And it's interesting because, you know, the Meals for Needy add-on is based on a permissive tax override that was pre-Prop 13 that a board could just levy. So for some reason, the board decided in the high school district could carry a much higher rate than the rate they actually set in the elementary. Because those rates are historical, they're pre-Prop 13. So the rest of the funds, there's not a lot of activity in the building funds, obviously, because there's just not a lot of activity. You can probably see, you know, we have cash with fiscal agent and went Fund 21 and 24, where the $3 million of the, you know, bond refunding proceeds are sitting until the call, which is in 2010. Not a lot of activity in developer fees or the state school facilities program. You know, we have our post-retirement fund, which is really kind of a misnomer because that fund is generally used to prepay against a post-retirement liability, and we use it as just kind of a conduit in terms of where self-pay retirees actually pay us money, and also where we actually have retiree expense for employer-paid retirees. And that's something that our auditors are talking to us about, is whether that's the appropriate fund and whether we should close that and open another fund. So we'll probably be bringing something back in that regard as well. Like I said, the rest of the funds don't have a lot in them. Then once you get past them, we have a number of schedules, the ones that were not included at the last meeting, things about like preliminary indirect cost rate, attendance detail.
Can you give us the pages as you go through?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's starting in page 140, let's say page 148. So you can see the schedule of bonded indebtedness, which basically that shows the outstanding general obligation bonds and how they're being paid off over time. You can see on the next page, which is 149, which is the average daily attendance, which looks at our P2 and annual ADA. A number of these forms are included at first and second interim. If you go to page 153, you can see our expense formula that shows there's a formula that prescribes how much we have to expend on general ed expenses, and there's percentages for each grade or each district type, elementary, unified, and secondary. We're considered a unified because we blend. You can see that our minimum is we have to expend at least 55% in those objects, and we expended, I think, 61%.
I want to jump in here because we have about 5 more minutes left for this item, and I want to be sure that board members have any questions answered if they have any. Is that okay for them to jump in with any questions at this point? or
I
is
just
there-
have one more thing I was going to
Okay.
show you, that's it. And then if you go to the revenue limit detail, which is just something that jumped out at me. What page is that on, Meg?
Looks like 172.
172. The thing that I thought was really painted a picture, if you look at the revenue limit sources and you look on the revenue limit detail, which is number 31, state portion of revenue limit, look at the difference between 8-9 and budgeted 9-10. Now, what would be great is if you had a total inverse relationship and your property taxes were going up by the same amount, but what that shows you is the way we're getting to basic aid is the revenue limit entitlement is being suppressed or truncated. So you're seeing a tremendous decrease in state aid. You're seeing some increase in property tax, but I thought that really painted a picture. Okay, I'm done.
All right, board members, any quick questions? Mrs. Deacon?
While we're in the neighborhood, on page 171, I was just curious, I saw a line that said gain or loss from inter-district attendance agreements. And I wasn't sure, I didn't know where we were getting that money.
Figured you'd see that. That is, how would you like me to explain this? This, actually, it was put on the wrong line. It was a mistake when I filled in the RL form. The problem, the difficulty with getting our RL form in the SAC software to tie to our funding, because the supplementals read into the general ledger. So the actual amounts that come into the system, into that SAC software, also read different situations. Since we're a blended revenue limit, it's not going to tie, and I had to fudge it, to tell you the truth. And the auditors and I have gone over it, and I showed them how I did that, and they're all good with it. So I got blessing from the auditors, but they're new and they had to
Excuse me,
learn.
you didn't have to fudge it, you had to enter it by hand, right?
Right, I did. I had to enter it by
Thank you.
Well, no, this is a hand-entered form. The whole thing is a hand-entered form, but when you do the technical review checklist, if what is in your general ledger or in the actual data dump from your general ledger doesn't tie to the revenue limit, you get a technical review. And I worked it through, and it's because it's a blended ADA amount, it's a blended base revenue limit amount, because I'm taking I'm posting the revenue limit as an elementary and a secondary district, but when I put it on one form, it's blended. So there's going to always be that difference. And I had to explain it to them because they're new, and so that's what we've been doing today, part of today.
So the line about inter-district attendance agreements, that was just kind of a place to put that
Yeah,
amount?
and I shouldn't have done it. I
Okay.
should have done it on a different area.
That's okay.
So
Thanks.
do other districts actually make money off of inter-district attendance agreements?
Well, actually, if that's where we're going to be putting, once we go basic aid, and there are charter schools out there that
That's
take
true.
our property taxes, we do get reimbursed for that.
Okay.
And maybe that's where we will end up putting that.
Any other questions? Mrs. Deacon has one more.
Good eyes.
Sitting at the hospital reading, so this is way back on page 9, and I was just curious about, obviously I understand why our certificated salaries are going down for 09-10. Our classified instructional salaries went up. Is that H&I money? Under classified salaries, classified instructional salaries were up 41.7% over 08-09. And I was just curious if, I thought, it occurred to me maybe that was, no.
It shouldn't be H&I.
Okay,
not-
wouldn't, because
not
that would be
last year.
certificated? Okay.
Well, even certificated will be this next year and not last year.
I can see
Right.
that.
Do you
So it's
understand my
quite a
question?
variance.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I
I'm
was,
looking at
I
it.
wasn't sure it was directed at me or not. You're talking about the 41.7% on the classified instructional salaries. Okay, the only thing that I can think of that would possibly have the difference here is, one, you can see there's a huge instructional aid going up in the restricted side of the 9-10 budget, which I believe is mostly due to we may have to increase the special education. We have we're going to do training. We would have to pay them to go to the training and things like that. That's,
Did we place hold some of the RS special ed money there?
well, I think we anticipated more
So you-
people.
Okay, so you just spread it among the objects and because there was more in the classified salaries relative to the year before, it looks pretty
yes.
significant. But we'll go look at that further. I think that's a good
Mhm.
observation.
All right, do we have any public comment on this item?
Kate Smith?
I've just submitted to you a series of questions that were effectively not answered because my question was derisive, false, and argumentative. One question dealt with an item here. That would be the superintendent's credit card and his choice to fly to Sacramento with 2 board members to convince the state to deny the appeal of board member Bob Noel's American Charter High School. The answer to that question, how much did it cost, was that my statement and my questions were derisive, false, and argumentative. However, and I'm still quoting, in the spirit of transparency, the district staff has provided me with the following. Airfare was $747, transportation was $2,001, cabin parking $109. All of the information I requested was available only at the district, yet Barbara Chiani sent the questions to Craig Price so we would spend more of our educational money obfuscating the facts. How is it that Tuesday's account stated that the work on quashing the charter school proposal cost over $10,000? I'm dealing with $1 million in legal fees that we just talked about. So thank you for not interrupting me. 3 minutes is not a very long time. So, Mr. Herron, I'm now asking you to find out what is the real answer. What was the
Mrs. Smith,
$10,000 spent
I'm sorry,
on?
this has to be about the unaudited actuals.
Yes, I can't find it in the 100 pages. I am taking out one little question about money that was spent, okay? So,
In the 08-09 unaudited actuals.
right. Over 1 million.
Sacramento, that was 07-08.
Oh, well, over $1 million was spent on lawyers to fight parents and to damn the teachers. Is this correct? Isn't this correct? Hello? Isn't it, hello?
No, it's not correct, but it's not appropriate to carry on a conversation here. If you have a statement, please make your statement.
Well, that's hard to do because you keep telling me I'm not supposed to.
If you have a statement, this is your opportunity to make that statement.
About the 08-09 unaudited actuals. You have 29 seconds.
Yes. That there's a huge amount of money that has been spent in the last year. There's a disconnect between the outcome of the spent money and our allegations that there's non-compliance to the law and that our children are not being taught. So
Thank you. All right, we need to have a motion on this.
I will move to approve the 2008-2009 fiscal year unaudited actuals.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It carries 4-0 with Dr. Noel absent. Next up is item B2, the approval of declaration of need for fully qualified educators for the 2009-10 school year.
Thank you and good evening. Each year, the Commission on Teacher Credentialing requires that we declare whether we have a need for fully qualified educators and if we anticipate employing teachers who are not fully credentialed. We do. We need to certify to CTC that the district has made every effort to recruit fully prepared teachers to specific assignments. And if we cannot find fully qualified teachers, the district must declare that we have an insufficient number of certificated staff available to us to meet our employment needs. Our current needs are as follows. We need up to 15 CLAD emergency permits. This is for staff who are in progress but have not finished their coursework or taken and passed all 3 sections of their CLAD test. A need for 2 resource specialists, 1 visiting faculty permit, which is a Fulbright candidate who is teaching from England at La Colina. 8 single subject limited assignment permits, which is fully credentialed teachers who are being asked to teach and have agreed to teach in an area in which they have knowledge but are not fully credentialed. They may have classes they've taken in the past. They might have enough units on their transcript to qualify them to be able to do this, but not to be fully credentialed in that subject matter. And a need of up to 8 interns from the Cal State Channel Islands, Antioch, Chapman, and CSU Northridge. These interns have passed all subject matter tests and are NCLB compliant. So it is recommended that the board declare a need for fully qualified educators for the 2009-2010 school year and that you pass the attached resolution number 0910-10.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the declaration of need for fully qualified educators for the 2009-2010 school year.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
That passes 4-0.
Thank you.
And then we move on to the conference agenda, item C1, update on implementation of parent pay transportation.
Well, we've been waiting 3 meetings and we've been running out of time consistently, so we just thought we'd tail this onto this agenda. And we're anxious to give you that information. Eric Smith will be making the presentation.
That's correct. This isn't time sensitive, but it seemed like an appropriate place to put it, and I might even get to speak to the item today. So, as you know, the board adopted a parent pay transportation program as part of the fiscal solvency plan adopted last year during budget development. We've worked with a variety of departments, including purchasing, public information, and IT to put together a program that would allow us to get it off the ground and get it in place, and hopefully without too many bumps in the road. As you can see, we've put together an informational flyer that went out, Exhibit A. It's been distributed to Adams, Monroe, Washington, and Roosevelt Elementary. And it was done that in collaboration with STA, Student Transportation of America, who's our transportation provider. We've also worked on a bus application, which is Exhibit B, and we've also disseminated that to the sites as well. Information's been posted on our webpage, and we broadcast it through our normal public information channels. Applications, which basically is $250 per year round trip, or in the elementary, we've broken up to $85 per trimester. Per student have been disseminated, and there's appropriate exemptions that are identified either in board policy or in law included in the application process. Probably the most significant exemption will be for those students that can, meet the criteria by meeting the free and reduced meal criteria, which will have to be certified by the Child Nutrition people since they can't share that data, interestingly enough. So, so we're working on this right now. We've disseminated the applications. They're going to be due into our office by September 18th. Julie Nemes, our internal auditor, has been working on this because she had so much experience dealing with the senior exemptions with the parcel taxes. We figured she'd be the exemption queen. And so she's also been heavily involved in this process as well. We're allowing parents a 30-day grace period beyond that September 18th, so hopefully we'll know our counts more or less by the end of October. We know there's going to be some enforcement and follow-up issues, but we're hoping that as we work through the process, it becomes more efficient. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions about it. I think for the most part, it's hasn't been as inflammatory as I thought it might be, but we'll see.
Mrs. Cordero.
I have one clarification question. The very last sentence on the cover letter says, STA will transport students with or without a bus pass, but will issue a citation to remind those riders who do not have a valid bus pass to apply for one. Does this mean ongoing forever, or?
Well, I think I think we want to report back in a couple of months because we're struggling with that philosophically. Obviously, we don't want to leave children, without transportation. So that's kind of the enforcement issue I was alluding to. I mean, what are we going to do if we have parents that refuse to pay? Are we going to go the collection route? So,
Okay.
But before we get to that, let's see how it goes for a while.
Any other questions, Mrs. Deacon?
This is maybe more of a comment and just something to think about down the line. I know as a parent, filling out multiple forms when you have more than one child in a school is a pain, and writing multiple checks. I don't know if they would have to write 2 checks, but I don't know in the future if there'd be a possibility to have a form that allows a parent to put multiple children.
Yeah, the reason we did not do that is a lot of districts will give a price break for a second child, and the board did not contemplate that. You've been asked that question by several people, but we just had to go with what the board approved, and what the board approved was the $250 round trip. So if the board wants to revisit that and change the fee rate or look at second or third ridership, that's something we can look at in the spring. Hopefully we'll have better data. And I think one of the valuable things that's coming out of this is we are getting a roster who rides the bus at each site. So,
For me, I'm not happy that we put this in place. And one of my concerns is about the multiple child issue. $250 for families that maybe just don't qualify for free and reduced is going to be expensive. And if they have 2 or 3 kids in the elementary district, then it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And I don't know if, especially those borderline cases, if they'll think to come to the board and make an appeal for some sort of relief. I also don't think that you're getting a lot of protest or concern about it because this isn't very many parents that are not on free and reduced lunch. And I kind of have a problem with that too in terms of treating maybe 5 or 6 or 10 or 15. I don't know what the number's going to end up, but it's going to be small. And so I hope we'll take a hard look at that in October when the numbers have settled out and see if it's worthwhile. If it is so fiscally advantageous to the district that we put this burden on families. So I know that we'll look at that again.
sure.
Mr. Herron?
Yeah, I think the numbers will speak for themselves. I mean, this is in the line item, I think, for $25,000. And
Yeah, I don't recall.
yeah, I
what
think it's
it is.
$25,000. So if it ends up nowhere near that number, that'll be the answer to your question. But, it's, the philosophy is, if people can afford it, they should pay it. If they, if they don't qualify for the free transportation. We're not in the business to provide transportation necessarily. And yes, there might be a benefit to multiple children. We can talk about that, but I think we need to wait for the numbers. Well, one interesting thing that the blog field seems to pick up on is the 15 cents for a copy of a letter. Is that just a school district policy that if you get a copy of something, you pay 15 cents? And do we mail it to them for postage? Or it just seems like a nitpicking thing to charge somebody 15 cents for it. I mean, it must cost us more to monitor that money.
Any other comments? Do we have public comment on this item? Oh, Mrs. Cordero.
Just had one question, and I think you might have said it and I just missed it. When is it coming back to us again?
Well, we won't have data until late October, so whenever the board wants me to bring it back.
I've jotted it down as a board brief item at the end of October.
Okay, great, thanks.
Kate Smith?
I'm a parent of a special education student. This is a little-known fact. Special education has a huge transportation budget. Every summer, when Marcia McClish was the SELPA director, Bill Cerrone's Office of Education submitted a non-itemized invoice for hundreds of thousands of dollars for transportation, and it was always paid, approved by the JPA, sight unseen, because there wasn't an invoice. It was just a request for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, in 1998, I submitted a compliance complaint after I learned that this school district had checked a box that stated they were transporting my daughter to school.
Mrs.
and-
Smith, this needs to be about the parent-paid.
Would you let me get to it?
this
I'm getting
parent-paid
to it. I'm
transportation
getting
program.
to it.
All right, you have a brief
I
amount
know
of
I
time
only
to
have
get to
3
that.
minutes. I'd like you to put some more minutes back on. I'm trying to get to that. There's a history to what I'm saying, and I need you to understand that you're just being uncivil. So, I found them in a fraud, a transportation fraud, and they got mad because they were collecting money saying they were transporting my child, but they weren't. So then they decided, well, we're going to transport your child, but it turned out that the bus cost $238 a day. And that I couldn't put my son on the bus because he wasn't special ed. So I had to follow the bus down to the school with my son. I did that for 1 day. So then I had to pay $75 myself
Mrs. Smith, tie
to
it
the
to the program.
I'm getting there. There's a history. Would you just listen? So I had to spend $75 a day to transport my child to school. I paid per day because they wanted my children to go across Foothill to La Colina and then all the way back to OAS, but I would be arrested if I accompanied them across the street. That's where I suffered post-traumatic stress from the trauma of wondering, should I send my mentally retarded 10-year-old and my 12-year-old into the street alone? Instead, I paid $75 a day to have that done. So now, as of February 2009, I am paid $50 to transport my child.
Mrs.
I am
Smith,
suggesting, this is it. This is where I come to it. Just listen. I am now suggesting, since there is a huge amount available in special ed, I suggest that all special education parents do the same as I do, that they get
Mrs.
paid
Smith,
to transport.
this is not about special ed transportation.
Yes.
Your time is up.
And
Thank you.
so I feel they should then give the money back to the schools and help the other parents who are being. All right.
Board members,
It's a great
no objection. The meeting's adjourned.